I'm a stickler for time, so it's not 7, but now it's 7 o'clock. So, well, thank you everyone for joining us, especially with the snow in the forecast. We really do appreciate that. And we appreciate those that are streaming this live or coming to view this later. I'm Mayor David Plesky, and it's a pleasure to be with you tonight. This journey we've been on to educate and get the public's opinion really started in full earnest over a year ago when we delivered our State of the Village in 2023, which has culminated in a lot of public forums like this. And so we're excited to go through a lot of the content with you today. Our goal is to keep this briefer than some of our other forums that we've had. We'll go through a brief kind of introduction to the referendum, and then I'm going to turn over to Chief Rob Barretto to go over some of the home rule possibilities that could be in play for public safety. And at the end, we're gonna have plenty of time for Q&A. So we asked it during the presentation, if you have any questions that come to mind or whatnot, you can either submit them online via the link that's on the screen, or at the end, you can just raise your hand and we'll bring you a microphone and you can ask them there. And we have all of our village staff here to kind of help answer any questions that may come up. I also want to recognize our other elected officials that are here with us tonight. We have our village trustees in the back, Trustee Forsyth, Trustee Prokowski, Trustee Della Penna, Trustee Domke, and Trustee Trejo as well. So to get us kicked off, we'll start with a refresher about the referendum and why is the village putting this on the ballot ahead of this election. And so the big thing is we need to address infrastructure funding for the village. For some time now, we knew that the Environmental Protection Agency and the Illinois Division of the Environmental Protection Agency issued regulations that are requiring us to treat our sewer water that we collect from the village to a higher standard. And so we all can agree that clean water is a very important thing for us and for our community, but that comes at a price tag. And so for Roselle, that is going to amount to about $80 million worth of water treatment plant upgrades that we have to do to stay in compliance. Most of that is to reduce the amount of phosphorus that's getting released into the streams. If you think about it at your home, a lot of yards use a lot of phosphorus for fertilizer, for the lawn, for gardening and whatnot. And so as we've seen that increase, that's what the agency has been getting concerned about. And now we have to do a lot of expensive upgrades. We also need to increase the capacity at our Devlin treatment plant. Now, the Devlin treatment plant has been in operation since 1928. So that's an incredible lifespan for public infrastructure to think that that's been there for almost 100 years. The thing is, the village has grown and we continue to see new developments come in. And if we do not expand the capacity, that could become a limitation for us accepting new business into this community as well. There's other things that we need to do as well. And so our annual street program has been funded at kind of a flat level for nearly the past decade at $1 million. And as you would expect, just like any household, that dollar's gone less far each and every year due to inflation, material costs, and labor costs. Based on our current projections right now, we were only able to resurface 1.6 miles of streets last year with that budget. We have 74 miles of streets in this village. So if you do the math, you're talking about every 60 years or so, a street would get resurfaced in the village. And so we know that we need to at least double, if not more, the budget that is going towards maintaining our streets. The other thing is we know flooding is an issue in this town and it's something that impacts different parts differently. And we've done a lot of resources in trying to obtain grants to help us manage stormwater better. We continue to see, like we saw last week, with extreme precipitation and also weather and temperature, these events are increasing in their frequency, and that comes at a cost to us. And so we have about $28 million over the next couple of years that we've identified in projects. Now, those are projects that just won't happen if we don't have the funding, but as homeowners and people who have businesses in our community, we know that flooding can be a real damage to the economic vitality and the quality of life in our town. And then finally, there's been a lot in the news media about lead service line replacement. And so the village overall is in a far better position than a lot of other communities. And I think that's something that is something we should be proud of. However, we do have service lines that we do need to replace, and it's mostly in the core of town, and that has a huge expense to it. Unfortunately, a lot of the grants and the opportunities you hear about in the media are for economically suppressed communities, and our community does not qualify under those conditions, or more diverse communities, and our community does not qualify either. So we're kind of in this awkward middle ground where we're not a rich community, but we're not a poor community, and we're not a diverse community by government standards. So we're kind of told, fend for yourself and find the money somehow. And so that's where the board has gone through and educated and looked at different options. There are things we could do ourselves to raise that money, but that would be solely on the residents. And that's why the board decided that it's important to get the residents' opinion on what they'd like to see our next steps be. And so the question you will see on your March 19th ballot is, shall the village of Roselle in Cook and DuPage counties, Illinois, become a home rule unit? Now, home rule would give the village the opportunity to implement different revenue streams. And so you hear a lot about taxation when it comes to home rule. And so what the village has looked at is if we were to implement a sales tax, something that we can't do today, somewhere between 1 or 1.5%, we could fund in full all the debt servicing we'd have to do to take care of our water treatment plant. And depending on the amount that we did implement a sales tax in, that would also help us shore up our infrastructure for roads as well as flooding. Now, we've also looked at other things such as instituting a gasoline tax and other things like that. And these are all scenarios that we would need to evaluate in further detail. But those would all be ways that we could tax not just residents, but people who come to Roselle and use our infrastructure today. And if you fill up your gas in Bloomingdale or Schaumburg, you're already paying for their vehicle sticker today. If you go and shop in another community or eat in another community, you're paying for their infrastructure improvements. And so these regulations that we're facing aren't specific to Roselle, they're across the entire state. The difference is all the surrounding communities around us were able to utilize their sales tax revenue to pay for it. And non-home rule communities like Roselle or Itasca have had to rely on their water bills mostly to pay for that. Now, without infrastructure funding generated by these, we have looked at increasing the capital improvement surcharge fee or the CIS fee that's on your water bill. And so what you see here is what that can look like. Today, for 1,000 gallons consumed, residents pay $7.50 to that fund. Projected over time, by 2032, we would see that increase to $20 per 1,000 gallons to meet the necessary funding requirements we have to pay off that debt servicing. And so the commitment that the board has made is with that sales tax revenue, you can see the direct impact, how that can keep those levels flat or at least moderate the increase to a substantially lower amount, as much as an entire half amount. If you were to look at it, it's $10 versus $20. If we go to the next slide, really what we can kind of see here is with a home rule status being provided, it does increase the village's opportunity to drive new revenue through different policies. Now, these are things that would have to be approved by the board, and the public has an opportunity to have input and participate in that conversation. And so through utilizing a sales tax and a gasoline tax, these are opportunities for us to completely fund our wastewater treatment plant upgrades, as well as increase our funding substantially for streets and help us really address a lot of different things that happen in the village, which the chief will talk about a little bit later. Without that, the board would have to rely completely on user fees and other things that we implement. The vehicle sticker is a great example of that. That's one revenue authority that we do have as a non-home rule community, and that's why we still have one today. Most communities that have gone away with their vehicle stickers have switched to gasoline tax or sales tax because they are home rule communities. The other thing is, as I mentioned earlier, the CIS rates would go up astronomically. So going from $7.50 to $20 would be the requirements today with our current rates and the projections that we can see for borrowing. Those could fluctuate over time. We also know that costs for the project will go up inevitably because materials, labor, and other things will go up as well. And so those will be things that we would have to take into account as well. There will also be fewer options for us to look at other opportunities, whether it's financing at a lower rate and other regulatory options that we would have with home rule authority. So what is home rule? And it seems like a really odd terminology, and it comes with a lot of different kind of misconceptions out there. And so in Illinois, when the Constitution was ratified in 1970, we wrote a whole new Constitution. They came up with this concept of home rule, and it was to give communities more local authority to regulate their own affairs. That includes taxation as well as other opportunities. Now, in Illinois, you can automatically obtain this by hitting the population of 25,000 or more. Or through a referendum, which is what the village is doing. Now, the village has been sitting at 22,897. Not that I'm counting, but that's something that we're fluctuated, and we'll talk a little bit more. Growing the village to 25,000 just really isn't something that's going to happen quickly. But also, I think if we think about it, what makes Roselle unique is the character and that small town charm. Increasing our population dramatically in a short period of time would really erode that. And so when we think about this, when you look at the area around us, all the towns in green have home rule today. The areas in blue are the only ones that do not. So we're talking about Itasca and Wooddale and the company of us. And so all the communities around us have various different taxation policies and other various regulations that they're able to implement because of their status. Now in Springfield, a lot of bills get passed and they always have an exception that home rule communities are exempt from those regulations. Non-home rule communities must abide by those. And so it really handcuffs us to a lot of what Springfield's dictating. And if you look at it, we elect one person to represent us in Springfield. We get one senator. There's hundreds of other people down there, mostly representing Chicago and other areas. And those are the people that are dictating a lot of these policies that then impact Roselle. And so we've created this imbalance that takes away a lot of authority from us as residents to have direct jurisdiction and oversight over. Now, home rule provides a stronger local voice. And so a home rule community has the authority to act unless it's explicitly prohibited by state law. And that sounds scary, but essentially what that comes down to is we would be able to make laws and regulations that make sense for Roselle in Roselle. And so the state still has the ability to dictate certain things to us, but it gives us more flexibility to deal with things that come up that are unexpected. And I think a great example of that is the current migrant crisis that's happening in this country. There's no state law about migrants, but we have no ability to act on it because the state doesn't give us, as a non-rural community, the right to regulate that. That's why communities like Bloomingdale, Schaumburg, Rosemont, Wheaton, and dozens of others have implemented their own ordinances because they have that ability to do that. And that's a good example. We don't know what tomorrow brings, but with home rule, we would have the ability to react and make a decision that's best for Roselle. The other things that would provide us with budget savings. So beyond the ability to have additional taxation authority, we would then be able to upgrade our credit rating potentially and pursue lower borrowing costs in the future for projects. Part of government is leveraging the money that we have and trying to stretch it further than we can. And so we're always going to borrow. Now, when you hear borrowing, it's not like the federal government with trillions of dollars of debt and whatnot. There's a lot of rules that we follow, and we've been accredited and we get audited very frequently. But this gives us some more opportunity to make better decisions for our community and return a greater value for residents. The other thing that this provides us is additional just regulatory possibilities. Today, we can't license a business. So if a landlord or a business owner isn't really running a reputable business, we don't really have a lot of opportunity to get involved. We can ticket them, we can cite them, we can't really shut them down. And so if someone's impacting the image of our community, we have limited ability to act on that. There's a lot of examples that would give us some more possibility to really enforce our rules in a more aggressive way. Another thing is there's things with zoning and other ordinances that we have where the state actually has dictated the maximum fines that we're able to impose on things. And it seems small, but the state says that for certain things we can only charge $25 for or $30 for. And when I hear a lot of community members say that they're upset about their neighbor's property isn't upkept right, or someone has trash out, we don't really have the right tools at our disposal to make those things mean something to a person. Oftentimes we have trucks parked on our streets, and it's cheaper for them to pay us a fine every day to park their truck illegally than it is for them to go find a proper place to park their truck. And so there's situations where we're kind of hampered in trying to build the best community we can because the state has dictated some things to us as a non-rural community. The other things, it gives us a lot of public safety and public health related support, and that's something that the chief will be talking about next.
Hello, thank you very much for coming out. I'm Chief Rob Barretto. By way of introduction, I was hired here in 1997. I've been here 26 years. Y'all in Roselle have adopted me as one of your own. So I'm going to talk to you about the possibilities that home rule can give us from a public safety standpoint. So public safety is affected specifically by home rule in that it allows us, I'm normally used to walking around. I'm going to be stuck behind here. Would you can hear me? Yeah. Yeah, that's true. That's why I'm going to stay right here. So what it allows us to do, as the mayor was saying, is it allows us to be flexible and to deal with issues and situations as they come up. You have crime and things like that that are always evolving, and it's difficult for us as a non-rule home rule community to be able to adjust to that. Think of the thing that we saw over the summer with those the street racers that were taking over all of the intersections and things like that in the city. Things like that for us, other communities very easily with home rule, when they identify the car by a license plate, just send $1,000 ticket to the registered owner. Hey, your car was involved in a street takeover in town, and most of the time these people are from out of town. So we don't have that ability right now. Home rule would allow us that ability. Especially because we have flock cameras and things like that, we would identify the people who were involved in the street takeover, of which we had a couple that we were able to prevent over the summer. And we would just send a ticket to the registered owner. Hey, stay out of our town. This is your $1,000 ticket. We don't have the ability to do that currently. The other thing that can happen is we currently do a lot of overweight truck enforcement. The state takes a lot of that money. I mean, they take actually the majority of that money. As a home rule community, we'd be able to keep that money here. The reason why is because we have people that are overweight trucks on our infrastructure that are damaging our infrastructure, and the state ends up taking it. So that is something else that it would help. Home rule additionally allows us a little more latitude in our hiring process, and we could streamline it. Right now, we're limited by state statute and posting a list and making sure that it goes before the police and fire board, and then we have to go back and do a background. With as a home rule community, we can streamline that process. We get good candidates, we do a background, we take it right to the police and fire board, so that goes very quickly. The other thing is it would allow us to impose higher fines, as the mayor was saying. You have these overweight trucks that are coming through town and damaging our infrastructure. We would be able to increase the fine and keep more of that. And then finally, the other thing, and I want to talk about that specifically, is being able to do crime-free housing. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean that's exactly what we're going to do if we get home rule, but at least it allows us options. So I was going to take the next 10 minutes or so to talk about what a crime-free housing program would entail in Roselle. So crime-free multi-housing is a nationally recognized program that's been around for over 30 years. It's 3 phases, which I'll get into in just a little bit. But if a rental property becomes certified as a crime-free housing property, we see police calls there reduced by 70%. So the goal of a crime-free multi-housing is to improve the life of the residents and make the landlords better landlords, and then improve the relationships between the community and the police. This is a proactive approach that we would take. This is not reactive. So what happens is we are in the community, we are working with the landlords through these 3 phases, which I'll go through, and we explain to them what they need to do to reduce the crime in their rental units. So as I said, it's a 3-step process. The first one involves a mandatory seminar with the landlord. So sometimes you have landlords in Roselle, they're actually not from here. They have a property here in Roselle, or they're a big corporation that owns an apartment complex in Roselle and they're off-site. So what this does here is it creates a mandatory seminar and explains to them what crime-free multi-housing is and what we expect from them. And I'll get into that more in a minute. But the second part of that is a property survey. So it's like a security assessment of the property. We would go through with the landlord and explain to them through the principles. It's called CPTED, which is crime prevention through environmental design. And it explains to them, hey, these are the ways that you are able to eliminate or reduce the incidence of crime by knocking out one leg of the crime triangle. So it's desire, opportunity, and ability. And if you remove the opportunity by doing crime prevention through environmental design, it actually reduces your police calls because it's less likely that people in those rental communities could be a victim of violence. And the third part of that is a neighborhood watch program. The neighborhood watch gets us in the rental communities, working not only with the residents to explain to them how they can identify areas of graffiti and drug use and report it to us, but it also builds a relationship between us and the residents, which is most important for us. So the first phase of the rental property mandatory seminar is you're going to talk about surveillance. You're going to talk about explaining to the people, the landlords, how they are going to notice if it's gang graffiti, the difference between some kid just tagging the side of a building and gang graffiti, noticing that if there are baggies or things like that that may be involved in drug use, allowing them to pay attention to that and know what it is and identify it. The next thing is lighting up areas that may be dark in the rental community there and prevent people from being able to hide out or be able to wait for people as they're going from their parking lots into their houses. The other thing is cameras. So not only would we light up the area as part of this, talking to the landlords, hey, this is how you're able to reduce crime, but then you put cameras here so that if something does happen, we have it and we can follow up and find who the offender is. The next part is access control, just making sure that when you get into a multi-unit property, that you just can't walk in and wander the halls. You have to get in. You either have to buzz in, you have to get in through with your key, but you just can't walk in. It's not unlocked. And then the next one is territoriality. Try to say that 4 times fast, right? So that is setting up the location and by clearly designating the rental property through shrubbery or through fencing or something like that. So it's very clear where the property is. And this actually comes into play when we talk about the crime-free addendum that we would have that is required that a renter sign when they take a lease out. And then finally, maintenance, just making sure that the property is upkept and it's not neglected, because neglected properties actually end up attracting crime. So as part of this seminar, the first phase of the seminar, or the thing that we talk about the most, is the crime-free housing lease addendum. So what it does is it creates a whole bunch of crimes that are considered nuisances. So when you rent in a resident or in a rental property in Roselle, on top of your lease, you're going to be required to actually sign an addendum that says, hey, if myself or anybody who's in the property that's living with me or anybody who's visiting does one of these, and this is not an exhaustive list, but we put a whole bunch of these up here. Does any of these crimes, drug crimes, gang crimes, disorderly conduct, criminal damage of property, these things, that actually is a nuisance. And that actually, just one of those could lead to an eviction. Now, we're not looking to evict people. But if it rises to the level where there is a party thrown in the apartment complex and a fight breaks out and somebody gets shot, now all of a sudden, now what we have is, hey, look, in this lease addendum, this says that one of these crimes could actually end up canceling the lease. So that would be part of it. So as I said, the mandatory seminar, we would talk to this is all about information and working with the landlords. So the mandatory seminar would go through the tenants' rights based on existing legislation. So making sure that the landlords know what rights the tenants have, because these tenants are our residents. And 99% of the people that are living in any of the complexes are law-abiding citizens. It's the 1% of the people that are making it bad for the people that are in the area. And we want to make sure that the landlord knows what rights that the tenants have. It's a partnership with law enforcement. We make sure that in the seminar, we explain to the landlords that they're in partnership with us. They're not acting as an agent of us. We're not looking for them to go out and ferret out things and find things for us. What we're looking for them to do is be aware of opportunities for crime, and then they can actually reach out to the residents and talk to them about it. So we're not looking to just go and evict people or catch people. It is a partnership that we have with the landlords. In these seminars, we talk to the landlords about gang awareness. Like I said, is the graffiti gang graffiti? Drug awareness. Is the stuff that you're seeing on the side of the apartment and the property, is this drug paraphernalia that has been ditched? And because there's drug use on your property, we make them aware of those things. So then what happens is, if they're, back that one up 1 second. Yep. So then what happens is, what we would do is, if there were 3, if you're a property owner and on your property, think back to those nuisance ordinances I was talking about. If 3 of those happen anywhere on your property, the property could go into the chronic nuisance area. And then that means that we could impose fines on the landlord. We could require additional seminars that hey, maybe they weren't getting the picture. So they get 3 of those. And it's a preponderance of the evidence. It's not like going back to that analogy I gave you, that there was, maybe somebody had a party and then there's a fight and it spills out into the hallway. If the police department goes there and we break it up, nobody wants to sign a complaint, but we know it came from that address, that still counts. It's a preponderance of the evidence. We don't have to arrest somebody. We don't have to get a conviction on this crime. So it's just a preponderance of the evidence in that, hey, we went there, we went to this house, 123 Main Street at this house, and this is what was happening. And the landlord was part of our crime-free multi-housing, and the tenant had signed the crime-free addendum. It doesn't include, which this is important, it doesn't include domestic violence. It doesn't include sexual violence calls. It doesn't include people with disabilities who call that they need help. We're looking to work with the residents. So it's not, if you're in an abusive relationship and we have to go to your house, that counts. That is not it at all. These are if you noticed in the last slide that I had with all of the nuisance violations, none of those were on there. So it wouldn't affect that. Next one. So then we move to the second phase. So that's the first phase, the seminar with the crime-free multi-housing addendum. The second phase of this program is SEPTED. So we would go through and do a security assessment on the property with the landlord. We would look at things like, hey, how long are the bolts into the strike face on the doors? Well, 2 to 3/4 to 3 inches is what we would be looking for. Do the sliding patio doors and the sliding windows have locks to prevent them from being jimmied open? Do we have a viewfinder in all the doors of the rental units that allows a 180-degree view? So when you look in and you can see somebody right in front of you, can you see somebody on either side? Adequate lighting, which I talked about under one of the previous slides, and then proper landscaping. Things such as, and things you wouldn't naturally think about, but this is pretty much a science. So trimming the bushes down, if you have bushes along the first floor in an apartment complex and it's up against a window, people could hide behind there and knock the window out and get in. Trimming the trees up, actually from the ground up to a certain height, which prevents somebody from hiding behind the tree there, and which has happened in other towns when somebody's coming into the house, running out and trying to snatch a purse or do a robbery and take a wallet or something like that. And then the third area is the annual neighborhood watch meeting. Remember, I said that this is a collaboration between the police, the landlords, and the tenants. So the neighborhood watch is where we go into the area and we meet at least once a year with the residents and explain to them, hey, this is how you can help us. This is how you can help improve your community. You can do this by keeping an eye out for crime. We would also do the same thing we did with the landlords and explain to them, hey, this is gang graffiti. This is something that you need to call us on. Hey, this is drug paraphernalia that's been left on the side of the apartment building. So this is what we need you to do. We need you to give us a call so that we can come out and investigate. So it's, like I said, it's what it is it's a collaboration between the police, the tenants, and then the landlords. So what are the benefits for us from a public safety standpoint? So rental property managers and landlords, so they get stable, satisfied tenant base. Remember I said 99% of the people that are in the rental communities, they're not a problem. They're raising their kids in Roselle, going to our great schools and being a part of our community. It's the 1% that makes it difficult for them. So what the landlords get is a stable, satisfied tenant base. Hey, everyone is happy there to raise their kids and live their life. The property values increase. There's lower repair costs because they're staying on it as we go through our security assessments. And then, of course, as I mentioned, improved safety. The renters, like I said, this is a partnership, have safer, more secure environment. They can go from their parking lot into their house. They don't have to worry. It's well lit. There are cameras there. It's well-maintained property. Confidence that the building is safe. Their building, they all have 180-degree viewfinders. Strike plates are all up to snuff. They have locks on all their sliding doors and windows. And then for us, what does law enforcement get out of it? Improve quality of life and safety for the community at large, which is our goal. That's our core mission, is to keep the community safe. And then it also, for us, educates the landlords. Remember, like I said, some of these landlords are probably out-of-towners. There's some big corporation that owns some of the apartment complexes. So what happens here is it educates the landlords, the property managers, to what we're looking for to bring the property up to snuff and to work with us. All right. So thank you very much. I really appreciate your time, and we'll be here for questions.
Thank you, Chief. And I think that was one example. When we talk about more local control and regulations, this is one example. And I think the thing is, the village has been regulating and has a lot of authority and has been using that for over 100 years. This just gives us more tools. We've essentially been working with half of the kit and trying our best to be creative to make things work. But there's a whole set out there that we are not allowed to touch today because we're a non-home rule community. And so this is, I think, highlights one of those areas from a public safety perspective. To kind of bring us back before we open up for questions, I think when we talk about this, the board had a whole year of conversation with the community and debate internally about how we wanted to approach this situation. And it comes down to, I think, there's three different ideas out there, and they're all in tension with one another. We want, as a community, lower density. Some of us, or I think as a whole, we all want the lowest taxes possible, but we also want stable public services, right? So if we were to play out and pick two, let's say I want lower taxes and I want stable public service, then we have to, as a community, accept more density. And we know from when we did the Metro 19 project and others, there's a lot of community resistance to new density coming to town. And for us to increase density in order to solve this problem, the question is, for us to get to that 25,000, we would need 3,000 residents to be added to the village. That's the equivalent of 6 Metro 19s, the apartment complex that's being built by the train station. And so can you imagine, for one moment, 6 Metro 19s popping up across the village right now? First, we don't have the space to build those, but that would change dramatically our traffic patterns, the demands that they have on our services. We'd have to hire additional cops and firefighters and other services as well. And so when we look at this, that'd be a dramatic change. And that's something that the board's not interested in pursuing from a density perspective. If you were to look at us historically, when we did the downtown TIF that brought the condos and all these developments in town, that brought over about 3,000 people, but that took 22 years for that to realize. So growing population to help solve and address the problem we have today really isn't something that's a valid option on the table. So if we go back to the Venn diagram and say, okay, well, I want low density and I also want to have lower taxes. We have to then cut services as a village then. And I know it seems easy, right? If you don't have enough money to pay for what you need to cut something in your budget, right? That's what any business or any household would do, right? For us to do that, we'd have to cut 20% of our budget in order to make that happen. And so when we look at it, the majority of our expenses is in personnel costs, because really what we are at the end of the day is delivering services to the community. Police, fire, the people who plow, are people who maintain our water flowing and our sewer treatment plants, our finance department to help manage the bills, paying our vendors, making sure that we're abiding and there's no theft going on in the village. These are all important roles that we have. And so if we were to reduce staff by 20%, that's 20% less cops that we have on the street, 20% less firefighters, 20% less plow drivers and whatnot. And that's in the order that they make up from a budget perspective. To have meaningful cuts, that's what we have to look at. And the thing is, the village has been very conservative in its budgeting for decades. And so when we went through the recession in 2009, it was a very difficult decision for the board then to make a lot of cuts to the village. And a lot of those cuts hurt this community. And we slowly, when we were able to, added the necessary roles back. And the roles that we really didn't need back, we didn't hire back. And so we already went through a big process of reorganizing ourselves and making sure we were positioned well, that for us to make cuts now, we'd see a dramatic drop in the services that we're providing to our community. The other way you could look at it is we would eliminate all of our contractual services, which would be some of our snow removals, mosquito abatement, paramedic services, and street maintenance. And so that is not, that's a deal killer. That's a big responsibility this village has. So if we go back to the Venn diagram, then the other option that we look at is, if we want lower density and we want stable public services, we have to look at revenue streams. And that's really what the board is looking at with this option. And here today, and through everything, the board and the village is not here to tell you to vote yes or to vote no. We're simply here to educate you, because you're going to have to make a decision as residents and as voters, what's right for you, your household, and our community. Now, for us, in order to make this happen, it's about, do we want to have new tools at the village's disposal, not only to help regulate, but to help find new revenue through a sales tax and a gasoline tax? Or do we as a community burden ourselves with a capital improvement surcharge hike up to $20 by 2032? And so I know we prided ourselves on being a bedroom community, and that's something that it makes Roselle a special place. It's why I've stayed here. It's why my family's been here for over 100 years. But we as residents don't have to foot the bill for everything. And I think the board has looked at this from an opportunity to say, it's time for the community to take a pulse and look at itself and say, what is the right direction for us to move forward on? And that's what the referendum is all about, really giving residents the opportunity to have a voice and a say in the policies that we have. So with that being the case, we will open, the other thing to that extent, before we jump to that, when the board made this decision, they wanted to make a commitment to the public to make sure that they understood before anything happened what their intentions would be. Because to give that kind of responsibility, that comes at a price. And so one thing that the board did memorialize is if home rule were to pass, they have committed to having CIS rates not exceed $9 in 2025, $9.25 in 2026, and not to exceed $9.50 through 2029. And so when we looked at that escalation, they could have gone up to $20. So they're giving a commitment that if this were to pass, they would not increase it above that. The other thing is property taxes are something that kind of change under home rule. And so technically a home rule community would have the ability to increase property taxes with no ceiling. And that's a scary thought. But I would say you elect us and we are your neighbors. We pay property taxes, and that's not something that we're interested in either. We also know it's bad for the economy of Roselle and for homeowners. And so the board is already committed as well to hold itself to the current limitations it has as a non-home rule community, which is capped at inflation or 5%, whichever is less. And in the past couple of years, inflation has been outrageous, so it's been capped at 5% recently. And so to quantify that for you, it feels like that's a lot of money. We increased it by 5% this past year. For the average homeowner, that's a $26 impact on your tax bill. So property taxes are not something that we leverage for much beyond our pension payments and to deliver public service costs. And so that's something that we would continue to do. In fact, Northern Illinois University did a study in Illinois to look at all the home rule communities, how many actually use their property tax authority. Less than 20% actually use that authority, but the board has already said we don't even want to touch that. Finally, the board has said that they would evaluate by the end of 2025 the elimination or the revamping of the vehicle sticker program. With a gasoline tax at our disposal, we could be able to phase that out or reimagine that program in a way that's different. When you don't have a lot of tools, you kind of have to rely on what you have. And so this is a commitment again by the board to reevaluate and make sure that we are being smart financially and making sure residents are getting something back at the end of the day. Now, we'll have plenty of time for a question, but if you have other things that come up or you want to bring a neighbor or friends to hear this, we'll be having coffee with the board on February 29th and March 10th here in Village Hall. Those are Saturday morning events. We have coffee again and treats, but it's a more informal setting. So you can ask questions and interact with the board and get their thoughts. We'll also have another public forum next month as well on February 15th, the day after Valentine's Day. So I know that'll be a great kind of romantic capstone for a great event for your households. But we also have village board meetings here, the second and fourth Mondays of every month. And the great thing about the village board is you can come talk to us. You'll see us at events. You can ask us questions. I don't know the last time I've ran into the governor or our state representatives and been able to talk to them about issues, let alone our federal representatives. And so the beautiful thing is you can come and talk to us at any point in time. And so those are also opportunities to approach us if you have any questions. So I think now that we're ready for Q&A. So we are accepting them also online. So we may have some digital ones and Emily will be fielding those and throwing those to us. If you have a question here in the audience, just raise your hand and Jason, our village administrator, will bring the microphone over so that way you can ask the question. With that being the case, Emily, while we wait for some questions maybe in the audience, do we have any that were submitted online?
Yes, we have received a question. It says, excuse me, does Roselle have a plan to address asylum seekers, scheduled or unscheduled drop-offs?
Thank you. So what I will say is the village has been leveraging our connections with the county board as well as DuPage County managers and mayors. It's a professional organization we're a member of communities across the county. So we can collaborate and understand what's happening and have resources at our disposal. And so we've had talks internally with our management team, with our public safety officials to have kind of a strategy in place should things happen. To date, there's been a lot of activity in the county. Roselle is yet to have any buses arrive to our town or to our train station. Right now, the state is funneling all those to a intake center at 2 locations in the city. And so there's really no migrants being dropped off in Roselle or being housed in Roselle at this time. But we do have steps in place should that happen to make sure things progress peacefully. Now, I know there's a lot of questions out there about what can we do? And so I know we had some thoughts, and I know Hinsdale is a non-home rule community, for instance, and they've passed some ordinances regulating it. The thing is, from our perspective, from our legal team, and talking with other home rule communities in the county, there's nothing to suggest that we have the legal authority to do that. And that would be something that would be highly contentious, could be litigated in court, and could result in damages or other things being kind of pushed back onto the community. And so it's our opinion. It's also the county's opinion. They're non-home rule. Home rule status doesn't just apply to municipalities. And so we are all the same mindset that we do not have that authority to regulate it without substantial litigation risk. Now, home rule communities absolutely have that authority. And so that's something where the board can't even discuss a policy at this time because of our status. But should something happen, we feel comfortable with our ability to react to that migrant crisis. So. So no, we would be directing them to use Metro to go to an intake center in this Chicago area. We would have a presence there to make sure that they disembark as they have throughout the county peacefully off the bus, you know, potentially waiting for the train to arrive and make sure that they get on the train to go to Chicago. With home rule, that would be more along the regulation of requiring buses to register with us, so we have knowledge that they are coming to our town. We could ban them. We could also ban migrants from or ban extended stays in our hotel. So that would give us opportunity to prevent certain situations from happening, or at least have more control over it. Today, we have no legal right to demand them give us advance notice before dropping off or arriving at any public facility in the village. Home rule would not be used to house migrants. That's a totally different policy decision. So home rule would only help us to regulate the limitations on it, if that makes sense.
We received another question online about crime-free housing. It says, will you require landlords of single-family houses to install security cameras and additional lighting?
So I'll give it over to the chief, but the one thing I will say is a lot of this is hypotheticals that the board has yet to discuss. And so I think we're laser focused on the fact that we need to first solve the financial issues that we have with our wastewater treatment plant. But the nice thing is these are other opportunities that we have. And so I think the one thing I will say is crime-free housing would actually give us the opportunity to understand how many single-family homes are truly rental. I can say anecdotally, in my own neighborhood, a lot of single-family houses have switched violently from being renter-occupied to being owner-occupied and vice versa. And today we have no idea. We only have anecdotal pieces of that puzzle, which if I'm responding to a call, I would love to know what I'm about to walk into, who is there. And so I think that's something that is a real reality in Roselle. It's easy to point out the big apartment complexes, but to not know what single-family homes have renters in it and might not be someone that we have on file is a concern, but I'll turn over to the chief to discuss that.
So no, not necessarily. So remember that I mentioned that we had a security assessment, and that's part of the whole thing. It doesn't say, hey, this is exactly what everything needs. If it's a single family home on a well-lit residential street with not very many opportunities for crime, no, we're not going to require lighting on the exterior and cameras on every single family home. But that would be determined by the security assessment that we would do at the time. So that's what it would be, very much be, what is your property? Let's go look at it. Are there opportunities that we could use our CEPTED principles and improve the safety and security of the property? And if we look at it and say, no, this is not a candidate for it, no, it wouldn't be required.
Does the audience have any questions? Yeah, one second. We can just get you on the microphone for everyone at home.
Just to follow up, how much money are we talking about when we talk about home rule? I mean, is it, you know, I was on the school board for 13 years, and believe me, I wasn't their best buddy because of finances and so forth, but it seems to me that sometimes we keep bloating the personnel. I'm not saying we are in local government right now, but I mean, from superintendent for 3 schools in this district to principals to assistant principals to every single, you know, administrative staff person that you could possibly use. Do we sometimes negotiate or talk with the school districts? I look at our tax bill and there's a lot of money going out there.
75% of your tax bill goes to public education today.
I mean, 21 million for just the local government here, right?
No.
16 million.
So 10% of your, Jason, do you want to?
Sorry, I correct me if I'm wrong, Tom, but our total local property tax collected from all property in Roselle is about $6.5 million.
That's what we collect from everyone in the village.
And it
Your
takes
property
us about
taxes.
23 million to operate the village. So property taxes, you know,
Make up a very small
third or
portion
a
of our budget.
quarter of the revenue used to operate the village.
The majority of that, so what we get is, so if we talk about our total budget is about $23 million, I'm gonna do some rough rounding. So our finance director, please don't give me angry glares here, but for simplicity's sake, our annual budget's around $23 million. We get about 6.5 million from property taxes. The other amounts come from, we get a share of your income state tax. So what you pay to Springfield as a part of your income tax, we get a small percentage of that. Now, we used to get 10% of that. The state during the recession reduced that to 6%, and now we're 6.47%. So the state took away a lot of our money that we relied on to budget with, and they've never given it back to us. And that's something we continually go back to Springfield to ask for. But so we get a smaller portion of your income tax today. We also get a portion of the motor fuel tax the state collects. It's done by calculation and whatnot, so we don't have any control or say over that, but the state shares some of the revenue they get from that. We also get a portion of a sales tax that the state collects as well. So we get these little bits and pieces here and there, fines and assessments and stuff like that. Like that doesn't make up a substantial amount of our budget by any means. And so when we talk about our budget as a whole, it's kind of brought from a lot of diverse revenue sources. So.
We do have another question submitted online that is somewhat related. What will cause more tax increases as a whole, home rule or the alternative funding options? A concern of home rule is that it is just a senseless increase in taxes, but if it would actually be less of an increase, I think that is important, or I think it is important that people know that.
So I think at the end of the day here, where the village is at is we don't really have a say in what we need to pay for. So there is going to be an increase no matter what. And I want to be very clear about that. Whether you call it a fee or a tax or whatnot, it's a tax, right? So it is going to increase with or without home rule. The difference is the village can only increase the tax or the fees on residents directly, or it can be a passive tax that doesn't just hit residents, but anyone who shops in Roselle, anyone who dines in Roselle, anyone who fills their gas in Roselle. So it's sharing the burden with not just residents, but with anyone who visits and uses our commodities in town. And when we look at our sales tax, I think it's really important. If you look at our town, a lot of our businesses are small mom and pop shops. And I think that's what makes Roselle a special place. We're between two big markets with Schaumburg and Bloomingdale. We don't have big boxes in Roselle, really. The biggest box we have is McDonald's. So when we look at things from that side of things, our sales tax wouldn't really be generated from a lot of retail action and whatnot. It'd be generated by a lot of our commercial activity off of Central Avenue. We have a lot of successful businesses that are targeting B2B or business to business. An office furniture store that does a ton of sales, a custom pallet packaging company that does international sales. Now, when we think about it, a lot of our sales tax revenue are coming from those kinds of businesses. And so I don't know how many residents here are buying office chairs from a office warehouse store or buying bulk electrical equipment, but that's where a lot of our sales tax is generated from. So when we talk about a sales tax in the context of that, we're going to raise about the same amount of revenue either way, where you probably would raise a little bit more with the sales tax because as our economy grows, it would increase proportionally, but that would offset additional costs that would happen and be on a broader base instead of just Roselle residents. And I think that's an important differentiation is things are going to go up. The village has the authority to raise your water bills. The difference is that's only you versus allowing that to be spread across multiple other people.
Yeah, and I'll probably get a ticket tomorrow because of this question, but I love my police.
We don't do
fire
vindictive.
department. As a matter of fact, I was a volunteer for the fire department, but I've been in the village for 35 years now. But my question, I guess, is I understand it's tough to balance a budget and all that kind of stuff. And I do worry that the village would have be able to borrow money and so forth, because I've seen what happened with the federal government with that. I'm not saying that you guys do that, but it's dangerous as far as I'm concerned.
Well, if it reassures you, Tom, our credit rate, we're AA plus.
Yeah.
So we're just shy of being AAA. So
yeah, I could be A plus and $500,000. So, but I get it. I get all this stuff. It's a tough job. But I guess I remember writing an article for Daily Herald one time, and it always seems like there's a referendum that comes every once in a while for Lake Park that they want to pull. And in this column, I wrote, why don't, while negotiating a new contract, you put aside money, and in 5 years, you'll have enough money to pay for a poll. They could have done that 10 times already. And I worry because I get that it's tough to pay some bills for required things that the government is requiring you to do, new water treatment plants and so forth. You can anticipate some, but you can't anticipate everything. But the problem I have is if, like, for instance, when I read the flyer for the Roselle recently, what popped out at me was 44% of our expenditures go to pensions. Now, I'm a pensioner. I've been retired for 9 years, civil service. But I started in 79. In 1982, the federal government actually came out with a new retirement plan. And civil service, I retired to civil service, but I had an option to go to the new one. Go civil service or federal retirement system or whatever. And what that did was it gave you, instead of giving you a pure pension, it gave you Social Security, it gave you like half the pension that you would have got from civil service, and then you got matching 401k. And the beauty of that was that it was reduced liability for the entity providing it. So we have local government paying 44% of our budget goes to paying pensions, which I believe that's.
So just to correct, so it's actually 50% of your property taxes goes to pension payments.
Okay.
And that's at 6.5 million. And that's, so you're talking about, Tom, how much of that percent of our total budget? Less than 9% of our total
Okay.
budget goes to pension
And
payments.
let me just say, I think they all deserve it, to be honest.
Well-
with you. But let me just finish up by just saying that, if we were to really drive down, I've talked about this for 50. I remember, I think, State Representative Musman was here, and I said, you guys ever look at reducing expenses? You guys have, but I know Musman wasn't at the time, at least. But do we look at that kind of stuff? And I know it's out of your hands. It would be probably require the state to have to do something. But
Exactly.
does
So,
anybody get pushed to the point before we go bankrupt?
so I think it's a good, so you hit it right out of the park as far as that's something that we as a board don't have any jurisdiction over. The state actually tells us how much we need to do and what those benefits are going to be. And so we have very little control over it. And that's actually something that, as a part of our groups, I mentioned the DMMC, we're actually advocating right now in this session of Springfield to try to stabilize pensions and stop providing additional benefits and trying to level things off. There's a lot of talks. So back when the recession hit, we were able to get a big concession, not maybe in the way that you're talking about, but we had a reduction in the benefits provided, and that was called Tier 2. And so that was a big savings for us that helped us really catch up and be able to support pensions and that obligation to public employees and make sure that that promise is fulfilled. Now, what's going on right now in Springfield could set us back because they're trying to get rid of or erode the Tier 2 benefit system to bring it back to what it used to be. And so we're on the defense right now to stop things from getting back to the way they used to be. So we don't really even have an opportunity to try to advocate to ratchet it down even further right now. And I think that's kind of the climate that we're in. And so we're always looking at our expenses. And I think the thing to keep in mind is like the village has gone on almost a decade of having balanced budgets. So all of our revenue has been budgeted to be over our expenditures. And we actually have reserved over half a year's worth of money. So if we didn't get paid a dime, we could keep everything operating as is for 6 months. And so we are in a really strong financial position. And that's why really what's the impetus of all this is unfunded mandates from the federal government. And those are the things where to the tune of $80 million, that's a big expense. If it was smaller, we could absolutely play with the budget. We could figure things out. We could borrow a little bit and make ends meet. But the thing is, this is such a massive project with a deadline that is very quickly approaching. We've advocated for deadline extensions, for other opportunities to make this easier for us to work through. And there's just no wiggle room from our partners on that end to give us the space to do it. And I think if this was less substantial a number, we could go through those more normal means. But this is one of those things where we're in a position where we don't have much choice but to find the means to pay for it. And by financing it, we're talking about needing only $4.5 million a year to pay for the debt service, which is far better than trying to figure out how you come up with $80 million. But where we're at today organizationally, because we've been so tight and rigid with how we've done things, there's not a whole lot left to cut before we start to see a reduction in what we've been doing. And I hear different messages from residents about you're not doing this enough, we're not doing this enough. And so I think we'd have to have another conversation as a community if we really want to do that, to say, what are we willing to take off the table? Because I hear, and we hear as a collective group, we have a lot more desires of what they want to provide. I think we've been very good about regulating what we can do and can't do. But I think we're at a point where I feel very proud of what we do as a community. To do any less would put me in a position where I don't think we would become named a Daily Herald top pick community like we were last year. We're getting recognized and businesses see that. Our vacancy rates are all in single digits. Office, commercial, retail, they're all in the high 90s for occupancy rate. That's a beautiful thing. People want to be in the village because it's a good place to be. And so I think we're at a point where we don't want to jeopardize the progress that we've made. And so that's where we're kind of evaluating it from that lens. But I think your points are well taken about some of those other issues that happen out in the community and whatnot. So.
We do have another question online as well. This is back to the question about asylum seekers and busing. One of our viewers asks, how was Hinsdale able to implement their restrictions as a non-home rule?
So I think one thing that's true about government is you can pass, and look at the federal government, because they do this all the time. You can pass any law you want. It's just not legal. And so I think the question there is Hinsdale made a decision personally. They took a gamble and a guess. They said, who's going to challenge us on it? And so the thing is that can be expensive and lengthy, and that can create a lot of distraction from keeping things moving. And so that's what Hinsdale has done. Again, talking with other non-home rule communities, including DuPage County, and with our legal counsel who represents the village, we've all come to the determination that the state does not explicitly allow a non-home rule community to regulate buses or migrants. And so that's not something that we feel would stand up in court. And it holds substantial risk to being challenged. And so there's a lot of groups out there that are advocating for migrant rights and whatnot in this environment right now. And so I think the thing about Roselle is not only have we budgeted conservatively, I think we're also very conservative about how we go about regulating things. We don't take big leaps of faith that could jeopardize our position or tie up money in legal battles. Some communities definitely have the money that they can lawyer up and fight in the court system. That's just not something that Roselle traditionally likes to do. And I don't think fighting in the court necessarily is the best use of our money. And so just at this time, that's the position, and that's what our legal counsel has provided us direction on. Yeah, back there, sir.
Thanks. I support the home rule. I know I'm paying taxes to Schaumburg, to Bloomingdale when I shop there. They can pay here as well. My question is there any savings, or have you looked into outsourcing the water treatment to the county or to work with other communities?
So that's a great question. And one of the first things I asked when I took the oath as mayor and I was working with staff on this issue, and I think the part of it is to do any changes to sewer treatment would take reasonably decades, because there's a lot of engineering involved and a lot of work, because a lot of it's gravity fed, right? And there's a lot of pipes, and where we move that stuff, it's a miracle, honestly. You flush and you don't have to worry about it, but it takes a whole lot of work and money to do that. So I think what I personally would say is in the short term, no. But I think there's going to be a growing condition where these regulations are going to continue to come. This is not going to change. This is something that Mayor Smolinski, when I was talking to her recently, she was dealing with on a number of different occasions. It was just fortunate those are lower to implement projects than the ones that are coming down now. And so I think we're going to see consolidation in the future. Now, Cook County, if you live in Cook County, Roselle, your sewer treatment water is actually a part of the MWRD, or the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District. And so that is a big district that kind of it centralizes all the operations, but then all the communities are paying into the costs. So you have these larger facilities that are you get more efficiency from it. Now there's parts of the county where a couple communities have worked together on, but there's no one massive system. And so there's a lot of talk about evaluating a lot of these things in terms of the water side. So currently we buy our water from the city of Chicago. And that's very expensive in a lot of ways. We're subsidizing the city of Chicago and balancing their budget because of the rates that we're paying. Your water rate is passed through from the city, quite honestly. And so we're actually investigating the opportunity with our partners to have our own water supply in Lake Michigan. So DuPage County would control, as a part of our water district, would control the collection of that water. If that goes well and that project kicks off, which is billions of dollars, but would be cheaper for us overall, I think you could see a similar blueprint for us to kind of consolidate and look at wastewater treatment coming under one umbrella. And that's something that I think, I hope within my lifetime, we can see happen, because there's things that there's no Roselle way to treat water, or a Bloomingdale way to treat water, or a Schaumburg way to treat water, right? There's just the way that we're told we have to treat water. Let's be honest at this point. So why not get the economies of scales bigger and hopefully defer or spread those costs out across a bigger group of people. So it's a really good notion. I think the problem is it just would take a lot of effort to reroute pipes, lay down infrastructure, get easement rights and things of that nature. It becomes a real administrative headache, but I think that's something that in decades will we see? Absolutely. I would hope. Yeah, back there, sir.
I also think I'm leaning in favor of the home rule based on some of the things I've heard as well as read. I'm wondering if you have any sense of how that March 19th vote is going to go, if there's any polling or anything that you've looked at. And the other thing is, along those lines is, my initial response, okay, the migrant concerns are big on my radar. And the fear factor of, well, if we don't have home rule, then we're going to be, at the state's control. And I don't like to react. I don't like to vote based on fear, but I definitely don't like that topic. And it's one that does concern me. I'm trying to give some advice, I guess. The fear factor might not go over as well as like just the benefits side of what could come out of the home rule.
Yeah, and I think, as opposed to other initiatives or whatnot, like we're as a village, legally prohibited from campaigning, but also I think we've taken the approach of like, it's really a resident driven approach, right? So we're going to present the facts out in a way and, we're going to allow the community to make that decision overall. And whatever the community decides, we're comfortable with implementing the policy that we need to do based on that feedback. And so we have not done any polling. There's no consultants we've hired to help us orchestrate how do we, tell you or sell you the message. We're just telling you the facts. And so from that side of things, we're trying to answer the questions that come up and just provide it in a way that everyone can digest it. A lot of it's just very dense material. So it's hard to get that in a package that everyone can, relate to and understand. But so we have no pulse on what's happening and whatnot. But I think the biggest thing is making sure that you're educated, your neighbors are educated, your family's educated, because the more people understand about it, then, we can all feel good about the decision, whatever way it is, come March 19th. So thank you. Any other questions from the audience? Do we have any online? Did you have a follow-up question? Oh, okay. Perfect. Do one last call. Oh, yeah, absolutely. Let me just get you on the microphone just so that way people at home can hear you as well.
I think when you hear home rule, at least because I'm older and I've heard a lot of not good things about home rule.
Mhm.
And I think my main concern is I understand everything you're saying about the financial and the safety in that, but I'm more concerned about losing my right to have a say in things. For example, when a referendum comes up to put a pool in or a skating park or something like that, that I'm going to be able to vote on that, and that home rule is not going to take that away from me.
No, absolutely not. So what home rule does is it just gives the board more ability to do certain regulations, and we do not do anything with the parks, the library, the schools. Those are all independent taxing bodies. So giving the Village of Roselle home rule authority doesn't change how those entities operate and work. And so for them to issue debt or to do those types of projects, there would still have to be a referendum. But also there's things that the village still can't do without citizen participation. So real estate transfer tax is one that a lot of people get worried about, or realtor associations start to push out there. That's something that has to be implemented by a referendum no matter what. Doesn't matter if you have home rule authority or not. You have to vote on that as residents. The board can't initiate that unilaterally. The other thing I think that's worth noting is you can also by referendum take away home rule authority. Home rule authority is not permanent for any community. And so you at any time can vote to say the village is doing a real bad job. You don't deserve to have that authority, and you can take that back. Now in Illinois history, that's only happened to 4 communities. And so I think that speaks volume that really it's about partnership, right? You have an opportunity to elect your mayor and your board of trustees. And at any point in time, you can come and talk to us at a board meeting and advocate and share your opinion. But if anyone's not doing their job, you have an absolute right to run for office, but also don't vote for us too. And I know that's more reactionary and you don't want to get to that stage, but I think there's a lot more accountability at a local level than there is there. And I think the board has shown in the past, like even with cannabis, they didn't have to do a referendum. We did a referendum, right? And so I think that is something that right would never be taken away. Home rule doesn't change that kind of impact. And so I think that was a very well put question.
Oh, one more thing.
Yeah.
I want to commend our street department. They're great. They did a great job on the snow removal, and they have been every time over the past 10 years or so. Every time there's been a really bad storm, they always really make themselves proud.
Thank you. I'm very proud of the team. I know we've done a lot to make sure that we're continuing to operate safely and effectively. And I know the crew put in 72 hours straight this last blizzard of operations. And so I know our team really appreciates that. So we'll make sure that gets back to them. And so thank you. Any comments online? All right, last call in the audience. Well, appreciate everyone coming out tonight. Again, please spread the word. This has been recorded, so your friends and neighbors can view it online. We also have other opportunities with the Coffee with the Board coming up February 10th, another community forum coming up February 15th, and another coffee March 9th. So appreciate you coming out and participating tonight. Stay safe.